This is Mark Mullinax, and I welcome you back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 24. 1 is the loneliest number that you'll ever do.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
To tiptoe is to lift the heels in order to increase one's height. To stride is to extend the feet in order to extend one's pace. A person can do this for a while, but not for long. Likewise, those who consider themselves don't appear for long. Those who watch themselves don't appear for long. Those who display themselves don't shine for long. Those who display themselves don't flourish for long. Those who flatter themselves don't succeed for long. And those who parade themselves don't lead for long. Ching, from an early commentary on Tao Te Ching, translated by Red Pine.
Thank you for being here today. I am honored to spend time with you again. Today's question asker and quote reader is Jimmy Knight, who works with college students to match their gifts and callings to careers. Recently in this pod, we have spoken often about the key practices of trust, faith, and alignment with Tao, virtues which are the products of years or lifetimes of integration with Tao. In this verse 24, Lao-Tzu pauses a bit to remind us of what happens when one does not practice Tao trust or Tao alignment. Briefly stated, practicing anything other than Tao is to practice something artificial, and will feel like, in both body and soul of the practitioner of this artificial other, the equivalent of trying to walk in a dignified fashion while on tippy toes, or trying to walk at all while straddle-legged. And this is where Lao-Tzu gets ludicrously funny in this verse. I hope you like it. Taoism is one of those few spiritualities I know of that uses humor as spiritual instruction. For when you laugh, I mean really laugh, you're not thinking or scheming or living in the future or past. Thinking destroys, just shreds spontaneity. Spontaneity, or Jiran, is our direct link to Tao. So what do you think about these two ludicrous images in verse 24's first two lines? Here we go. Verse 24 leads to nowhere. Standing on tiptoe leads to tottering. Straddle-legged, one cannot walk. Playing to the gallery is not an enlightening practice. Crowing one's own opinions is no way to distinction. Self-elevation brings no merit. Self-praise has nothing to offer others. From the standpoint of Tao, these reckless desires are so much rotten food, parasites, or body tumors. Detestable. Tao has no home in these.
When you're listening, are you listening?
So, like I mentioned, the two images in the first two lines are knee slappers. Imagine a city street block where every pedestrian is walking around on tiptoe, like awkward ballet dancers. If you came across such a scene, imagine the amusement this would cause. Or, even worse, in the next city block, everyone's walking straddle-legged, their knees locked straight, legs askew at 90-degree angles, and they are walking, well, monster or zombie walking, with exaggerated long steps, twisting their body first this way and that, as they try to walk a straight line. Absurd. Hardly natural, right? Now that Lao-Tzu has got our attention with these two comical examples, he highlights 4 more artificial stances or positions a person might take. But these next 4 are, shall we say, closer to home. These 4 are hardly natural and just as dangerous as tiptoe and straddle-legged walking, but they are less ludicrous to most of us and much more accepted in polite society. However, do understand, these next 4 are not dissimilar from walking on tippy-toe or straddle-legged. But hey, Lao-Tzu seems to say, are not these next 4 artificial stances things we often practice? Why do we accept these 4 but reject the ballet and zombie walking? Why does no one laugh at us in ridicule at these other 4? Number 1, playing to the gallery, grandstanding, attracting attention to oneself, striking a pose, showing off, or putting on an act to outshine others. 2, crowing one's own opinions, or asserting the correctness of one's own untested opinions, asserting oneself and resulting habits as self-righteousness, or thinking undisciplined thoughts and then actually believing your thoughts, believing that having your opinions actually makes them true. Now, if you've ever been stuck at a dinner table with such a person, you know how tiresome, but also how common, this non-virtue is. And maybe, just maybe, if we get quickly tired of that person, maybe it's because we do the same thing too and just recognize ourselves in that other person. Ouch. Number 3, self-elevation, like highlighting and treating one's achievements as sacred things, surrounding self with only one's self. I'm speaking about the elevation of self at the cost of devaluing and lowering others, like a holier-than-thou attitude. 4, self-praise, self-congratulations, big head, pride, arrogance, boastfulness, egotism, etc., etc., etc.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Lao-Tzu, as he outlines these 4 virtueless practices, performs some cool word jujitsu. 6 times he uses 2 words as one phrase, che bu, which literally means person not. But I'll say it from here on as a person not able. So 12 words out of this 47-character verse, 1 of every 4, hammers home one crucial idea. When engaged in these virtueless practices, one becomes a person not able to be someone enabled to do what is right, virtuous, necessary. These people are too bound up with self to be useful to others. This phrase, a person not able, means that something has become impossible because of a prior condition. The person, by their choices, has made something impossible that could have been available for their use. What has become impossible? Virtue. The artificial life crowds out and renders well nigh impossible a life of virtue. And I remind us here, virtue is the Te in Tao Te Ching, or the book about the way of virtue. The result? Something good is now gone. Maybe not forever, but as long as the practices of ego keep occurring and reoccurring, forget about refinding that good. The practices of ego cannot find peace, cannot establish harmony, are unable to reach spontaneity or jiran. They are che bu. The person is not able to see these virtues.
You're so vain, you probably think the song is about you. Carly Simon.
So here's a free translation of Lao-Tzu's intent. If one has a precondition of walking about on tiptoes, one cannot stand. Steadiness has left the station. If there's a predilection for locking one's legs and straddling, one cannot walk. For such a person to walk normally will seem like speaking a foreign language. If there's a preconditioned preference for making a show of things, one has lost the power to shine with Tao, or Tao to shine through. For one lives in the huge shadow of a renegade ego ever attempting its stratagems. A precondition of fondness for being self-elevated means one can kiss goodbye being known for your Tao connections. The one who has practiced boasting or self-elevation will never find achievement. Their only achievement is the multiple but tiresome ways they get to talk about their favorite subject, themselves. The one who already wallows in conceit cannot last. Why? Well, isn't it obvious? That person has abandoned the natural practices of trust, truth, and all their substitute practices are just ploys and games to fool themselves. The person who persists in these artificial preconditions cannot chebu, stand steady, cannot chebu, walk, cannot chebu, shine, be illustrious, achieve lasting effects, will not chebu prevail, cannot chebu be honest. To see only the self prevents chebu, honesty, for one will ever be off-balanced. In sum, chebu means that some things have become impossible. There are doors here, portals to steadiness, shining, endurance, and balance, which a person, by not practicing trust, ignoring truth, and forgetting Tao, they've closed off these ways as ways of living. In one's vicious calculus of ego extension, one may miss the capital V virtue of Te altogether.
The greatest wisdom is seeing through appearances. Alan Watts.
So this verse 24 is a lesson in the desolation of ego-assisted artifice, the utter misery of not being natural. Walking around all the time on tippy-toe is neither stable nor stabilizing. And walking around with one's legs at 45-degree angles off to each side is most unnatural. So are the other four named practices of leading with the ego. Anything other than natural action leads one nowhere. How does one know the artificial has taken over? By one's sheer exhaustion at leading a pretend life in blind pursuit of reckless desires. Could one ever trust a leader so dedicated to their own exhaustion? Hell, for that matter, can one even trust oneself if dedicated to draining and non-natural practices?
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening,
What are modern corollaries to standing on tiptoe, walking with legs wide apart, playing to the gallery? Well, maybe working only to impress, or impersonating someone else, being anywhere else than in the now and right here, making very sure you are noticed, mentioned, praised, not noticing anyone else in the room because we may have forgotten how to read it. These kinds of practices, and we become what we practice, remember, these kind of practices make us Tao refugees. Tao cannot live in or through us. Sometimes when we are on ego autopilot, it could be because we're unaware of our depths linked with Tao already. Unaware of this rich trove within, we can sometimes forget who we actually are. And as we get deeper into forgetfulness, we start more and more to see things as we are, not as reality is. Our egos develop these filters over our senses, especially in the mind, that filter out reality, and we see only self-referencing ghosts, images, and illusions. Forgetting, we are virtually becoming a person not able to connect with Tao. As the last of verse 24 reads, from the standpoint of Tao, these reckless desires are so much rotten food, parasites, or body tumors, detestable. Tao has no home in these.
Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Leonardo da Vinci.
I thought this quote from Rainer Maria Rilke on ego also makes sense here. He says, "Make your ego porous. Will is of little importance. Complaining is nothing. Fame is nothing. Openness, patience, receptivity, solitude is everything." Living in connection with Tao, all this tiptoeing and straddling and all these ego-elevated practices fade into insignificance. The one who has tasted Tao cannot sustain the unnatural for very long. There's something more rewarding than the ego's never-ending plots and ploys to keep oneself in the popular spotlight. Like, isn't it time right now to rest, be open, patient, receptive, be simple? Is this not the place, right where one is, to stop trying to sing a solo or do the self-elevation dance alone all one's life?
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Harry Nilsson.
There is life in abundance without needing to straddle or tiptoe. There is harmony enough without ego-assisted behaviors. In fact, harmony actually emerges naturally without the breathless ego running the show.
Real elation is when you feel you could touch a star without standing on tiptoe. Doug Larson.
Now, you may think I've been negative in this episode, and maybe so. I don't want this verse to end negatively. We all, at times, act out of ego and not out of virtue, right? This is nothing to beat yourself up with. It is only something to become aware of. And once aware, we have, I believe, the free will to change. One can return to radical humility. One can focus less on self and see greatness within everyone. To clear out excessive self-importance is the way of Tao. It may be painful to work on ego, but I find the practices of truth makes the pain worth it. It is possible to touch a star without the pain of standing on tiptoe. Homework. Maybe you can tell this verse really speaks to me. Does one of these ego practices listed in the verse rhyme with your own life? Playing to the gallery, crowing one's own opinions, self-elevation, self-praise. Our homework is to concentrate on one line of this verse this week and figure out how it may describe a portion of our life and how one practice we may have camouflages one's Tao awareness. That's all. You'll know what to do once you figure these things out. And by the way, no Taoist worth their salt would grade you. You can do that by yourself. Just be truthful. Only don't be too hard on yourself. I, myself, I'm no saint. Untamed, reckless desires emerge in me all the time. So this is my homework as well. And now Jimmy and I talk about his questions.
So in our discussion of being authentic to ourselves and finding our authentic selves, how do we find the courage to be our authentic selves? Is courage something that is found? Is it something that is won? And then a follow-up question would be, what do we do about the world of people who push us to conform to a predetermined or prescribed standard, somehow, pushing their mediocrity onto us? How do we persist? And are there lessons that cross over within the Tao that tie back to this that might be able to help us find that courage?
Great questions. Great questions. Thank you so much, Jimmy. I think courage is, first of all, something that each person has their unique blend of. How they were raised, how they have used their free will in the past to overcome things. So courage, I think, is a unique formula with each person. Studying Tao as I have, I think that some form of courage is always endemic in us. It's something that we find that we actually have. And maybe like a muscle, we can exercise it and make it stronger. So you find your courage Or maybe you're in a situation where it finds you. You're in a crisis. And then you come to this aha moment that you've got something that you did not know you really had, and you say, let's try this some more. Okay, like a new friend, and you want, I'd like to be around this friend more often. And so that's how I see courage. I don't want to commodify it into one thing, because I think when courage is exercised in our souls, if you can say that, then there's these parts that are drawing on these roots over here and those roots over there, and manifest in these branches over here, if souls can be like a tree. But it's unique for each of us. And so we come to our courage in unique ways, and we can express our courage in unique ways.
The idea of finding courage to persist is definitely something in my work with college students that is a daily activity, a daily discussion point. People are searching for answers. They want sometimes immediate answers, and I see that sometimes that pushes them towards easy answers.
Yeah.
And sometimes those easy answers have been prescribed or predescribed by mom and dad, or what they think the world of work is going to ask of them.
Yeah.
And what I am always trying to convey to them is that self-advocacy starts with self-knowledge. Yeah. And you have to grapple with who you really are before you can start answering those questions. Yeah. So courage becomes a big part of that. And other questions persist as well, as what do we do about the people, about those elements that keep nagging us.
Well, in the past few verses, the word trust has come up a lot. I think that each of us has our own unique relationship with trust as well, for it is a practice, can I say a spiritual practice, that you learn to trust yourself, much like you might learn to trust a lover. And when that lover breaks trust with you, then it's really hard to repair it. In the same way, we have, especially as we grow up, these senses, I need to learn to trust myself, for when I fail myself, or when I rely on someone else's authority rather than my own voice, then I get disappointed. And it's then hard to re-establish self-trust. So I see your eyes light up that you might think of. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
And one other thing that I also see in college students, that the action of self-grace sometimes comes back to, I don't know that I want to do that because I don't want to be vain. I don't want to be self-glorifying. So to me, it makes a nice little circle that comes back to some of these.
I think that your job, and then my job as a former professor, or while as a professor, is that we give students permission to experiment with trust, to experiment with courage, because they've seen these models. And sometimes the models in their parents or grandparents have been really, really, really good. And sometimes they're not good at all. And so we need to learn how to find each student, understand where they have been with this trust and this courage, and then help them write their own prescriptions for what that means to them, because they've got their own algorithm, their own calculus to courage. And we just can't rubber stamp and one size fits all our students. We have to see and know the students so well that we can say, have you thought about this? And you're introducing that idea at the right time, because sometimes they're not ready to hear trust or go to that level.
So true.
So trust is like, for some people, you start off with baby steps.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now to your second question, if you're ready to that, remind us of that, please.
What do we do about the world of people who push us towards conformity, or predetermined or prescribed standards, kind of pushing mediocrity.
Yeah, I think some of the same ideas here is that you've got to learn to trust that voice that you develop in your moments of developing courage and trust. You've got to learn to trust that voice more so than you would trust a voice on social media or a boss somewhere or someone who has been so-called important. But you've got to learn how to trust that inner voice. And I think this is what Lao-Tzu is doing in Tao Te Ching, is teaching us that if we trust anything less than our best, then we automatically go to a sliding, slippery slope of learning how not to trust self, learning how to give over our trust and allegiance to someone else so that they can tell us then how to think, what to think, when to think it. So developing this autonomy of trust, I think, is really critical. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that I see the successful college student, the successful adult that actually thrives out in the workplace. They have become at peace with who they are, what they offer. And they are offering themselves for all takers. Those are the elements that I see of people that slip into the stream of work and career and family and commitments pretty smoothly.
Yeah.
So the ones who fight that are the ones that get into it, and it's a little bit like a rapid for them.
And I think that the people that would have us agree with their thoughts and think their thoughts are people who have not come to peace about who they are. And so they need an echo chamber.
Amen.
Okay. They need an echo chamber to say, "Oh yeah, all praise to you. You're right." So that is what Tao Te Ching and Lao-Tzu are definitely against. Is selling yourself for the highest price or a mediocre price. Mm-hmm. It's still prostitution.
Wow. Infamous word there.
I think I can get away with it.
Okay, yeah, this is true.
Anything else that's lingering?
The idea of impersonating someone else. In your book, you mentioned that being anywhere else than in this moment in space. It's a terrible way to be. As I look back on things that I've done in my career path or other, I try to express to students, don't let this happen to you.
Yeah.
Take my notes on my face planting in life and just use me as a warning. And so I've been there, I've done that. It was not fun. And looking back now, I love your illustration of fighting for our right, for our sandcastle in amongst the waves. It's fruitless.
Yeah.
So being yourself is priceless. So it's my prescription to anybody who walks in my door here.
Yeah. Well said. We hear be yourself all the time, but I appreciate the ways that you're trying to tailor make that saying so that it comes to fit the college student that walks in with this question. What am I supposed to do with my crazy one life?
And people at this age, I didn't know what I didn't know, and if there's anything that we can do to help them find the answers, turn over the right rocks, and accumulate as much information as possible. To me, that's the key of making wise choices.
Okay. I'll let that be the last word. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many. whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching text and Taoist practices are good news for today. Tao still speaks. Jimmy Knight spoke and questioned. Audrey Davis drew. Molly Hartwell sang. Fortress Press still holds copyright for any use of my Tao Te Ching translation. And without you, where would we be? Thank you for your attendance in this class on Taoism. May your days begin in peace and become practices of radical hope.
As it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?